Just a reminder that we're open from next Sunday, Sunday the 7th of March, at 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock and 11:15. 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock and 11:15. It will be so good to be back and to see some of you. Today I'm going to talk around really the cleansing of the temple, the story that you'll find in John 2, beginning at verse 12. In the late summer of 2011, Roberta and I spent a few days in the Loire Valley in France. On a warm summer morning, we visited the Abbey at Fontainebleau. The Abbey was founded in 1101 by a hermit named Robert d'Arbisel for both men and women. It was large and extraordinary in the way it worked and in the work that it covered. It was run for 700 years by aristocratic abbesses, many of them of royal birth. They governed the monks, the priory outside the main walls, and 4 distinct communities of nuns and lay sisters, ranging from rich widows to repentant prostitutes, as well as a leper colony and a hospital. As you enter the grounds of the Abbey through an outer building, you stand in front of the church, which looks very much like a small cathedral. You walk down the steps to the door, and as you enter the church, you're met by another wide flight of steps that take you down to floor level. However, you do not walk down the steps immediately, because the light and the brightness of the church makes you pause in order to take in the view which greets you. Everything is white stone or marble, and the streams of light from the clear windows seem to make the whole space glow. You walk down the time-trodden steps to stand in the nave, in the centre of which stands a semicircle of pillars. In the middle of them stands a plain white marble altar, and just short of the chancel steps are 4 tombs. These tombs are life-size and realistic effigies of the 4 people whose bodies lay below them. They rise no more than 2 feet above the stone floor. These are the tombs of Henry II, his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine, their son Richard the Lionheart, and Isabel, the wife of Richard's brother, who became King John. Henry, Eleanor and Richard were once the most powerful people in the Western world. The church is peaceful and quiet, and it comes as a real shock when you discover that this place was once a prison, and not just any prison. It was considered to be one of the 2 harshest prisons in France. In 1789, the French Revolution brought upheaval to the country, and it was then that the Abbey was gutted and turned into a prison, and would remain so until the mid-1960s. This spiritual place that had looked after the poor and marginalised became a place that housed some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, who were mixed up with political prisoners and prisoners of conscience. The church had 3 floors built into it. The Abbey's refectory was used as a canteen, and you have to wonder what the prisoners felt as they looked at the wonderful paintings that were left and are still on the walls. Would they have identified with the crucified Christ? What would they have thought about the fresco which depicts Jesus washing the disciples' feet? When had they last felt the comfort of a gentle hand? The place that made me think the most was the very large cloister at the very heart of the Abbey. Cloisters were always enclosed, and their gardens were often beautiful, and they were always peaceful, as they were meant to be a depiction of the Garden of Eden, and therefore an illustration of perfection. During its years as a prison, the cloisters were used as an exercise yard. Photographs show that wooden platforms were erected around the cloister where armed guards could look down at the prisoners, watching and waiting for fights and disputes to break out and to step in and to break them up. As you stand in this large and once again peaceful square, you can't help but think of the muttering, cursing despair of the prisoners and compare it with the silence that the nuns would have insisted on in earlier days. When you walk through the restored Abbey of today, you're acutely aware of the spirituality of the place, and strangely, you're also aware of it having been a prison. And it dawns on you that the walls that surround you have listened to and absorbed so many different words and whispers. They've witnessed joy and despair and heard the words of prayers spoken by kings and queens, thieves and murderers, beggars and lepers, saints and sinners, the words of the ordinary and the extraordinary, whose lives were acted out in this place. The Abbey has witnessed love and despair, joy and sadness, birth and death. Over its lifetime, it has and continues to reflect the hopes and fears of all of humanity. The Revolution, the French Revolution, tried to rid the Abbey of God and religion by making it a prison. It failed. It failed because God has never left this sacred place. It is so easy to find God in the peaceful place that the Abbey is today than it would have been in the prison of yesterday. And I cannot but wonder how many tears God wept at the hell that this place became, a place where man's inhumanity to man was at times shown in all its fullness, both from the prisoners in their crimes and from many of the warders in their acts of brutality. But there would also have been people with humanity who treated others with respect and love. In this place, I was reminded of the words of St. Paul, these words: "Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ Jesus." God is never far from us, and there are places in which we can feel God more closely than in others. This Abbey, which stands on holy ground, and even when the holiness was forgotten or swept aside by government and the ambition of people, this place was never forgotten by God, not the ground, and most importantly, not the people who stood on it. Lent is a time to open ourselves to the love of God, to think about what matters in our lives. Jesus cleansed the temple of misuse and restored it to how it should be, just as the Abbey has been brought back from misuse to the spiritual place that it was originally built for. The Abbey is very much like Lent, a place to stand in order to reflect on the past, to think about the present and to look with hope and optimism towards the future. The Abbey stands quiet, peaceful and still, a place of hope in the busyness, bustle and hustle of life. We all need a place like the Abbey, a place where for a short time, sometimes for a very short time, that we can sit and think and perhaps pray, and a place where we can just be. We can find this at home, in the garden, in the park, on a walk. We just need time to find peace and to be alone and to think. Silence is filled with sounds. God is everywhere.